everyone, it's Chelsea, and today I am bringing you my Genrethon wrap-up video. Now, I feel like this was the first readathon that I've ever done that I actually stuck exactly to my TBR, and I accomplished all of it. So, I mean, pat on the back, all around. That's a pretty exciting thing for me, because normally I either stray very far from what I plan on reading, or, you know, I fall into the worst reading slump during readathons, which is like the worst thing that can happen, but neither of those things happened, so these are the books that I got to and my thoughts on them. The first book I had already started listening to at the beginning of Genrethon, and I decided to throw it in there because it's very rare that I read this genre, but I read Undeniable by Bill Nye, the science guy, and I very rarely read nonfiction, especially kind of reference type fiction or nonfiction, but I mean, it's Bill Nye, and I grew up with Bill Nye, and reading this book made me want to go and download as many episodes as I could of Bill Nye the Science Guy. But anyway, this book is essentially a compilation of all of his thoughts and notes and kind of expanding on all of his points that he touched on in the debate with Ken Ham about creationism versus evolution. Him obviously being on the side of evolution, and I just thought it was a really, really well done book because he touched on so many profound and seemingly overwhelming scientific topics and made them all very easy. They're all very easy to understand. You could understand his point and you can agree with him, and it all just makes perfect sense. He's just very well spoken when it comes to talking to non-scientists like me. Gave this 4 stars. I highly enjoyed it. I learned a lot. The next book that I read is Bone Gap, and this is by Laura Ruby, and this is a book that I have had my eye on pretty much since they released the cover of it, like a year or two ago. I believe this book came out last year and has since won a ton of awards and is at the top of a lot of lists, so it's kind of built my intrigue on it. This book I read for magical realism and YA fiction. It's very hard to describe. This is a book that you're probably better going in blind, because that's what I did, and it was just kind of enjoyable to see the story unfold. But it takes place in Bone Gap, Illinois, which is kind of a, like, rinky-dink little rural town that has a lot of corn around it and some really interesting characters. What I found really interesting about this is the magical realism aspect that gets brought into it, because I didn't know anything about this book going in, and it was kind of surprising to have that element pop up, and it was really, really well woven in, and it was just a really interesting book. It touches on some really hard-hitting topics, but I feel like it does it very gracefully, and it's not as in-your-face as a lot of, like, heavy books normally are. It touches on the concept of beauty and feminism and just, like, the impact of women in the world in different cultures. It kind of takes place surrounding these 2 brothers who are kind of taking care of themselves in this farm town, and this girl from Poland, I believe, just randomly shows up in their barn one day, and then one day she goes missing. And the main character that we're reading about is the only person to have seen what happened to her and is struggling to kind of portray what he saw. So obviously there's some magical realism in there, and there's some really important kind of mental disabilities that are also touched on in this book. I thought it was a really, really interesting story. There were so many, like, profound and poignant topics that it touched on. I gave it 4 stars. I don't know how else to describe this book other than you just kind of need to experience it. Next book that I got to for Genrethon has been sitting on my shelf for far too long, and I finally took this as an opportunity to get to it. And that is Codename Verity by Elizabeth Wein. This I read as historical fiction, obviously, and I have just always been intrigued by it. I knew that it was a World War II story, which are kind of always intriguing to me for some reason. That's a topic that I always find very interesting to read about. Now, I'm probably going to create a lot of controversy here. I thought this was an amazing book. I gave it 4 stars, and the only reason I did not give it a 5-star, like every single person on Goodreads did, I just personally did not connect with the characters too much, and it got very technical. And all of that is kind of done on purpose. I understand it. The writing is beautiful. It's very technical as far as piloting airplanes, which is not a topic that I'm generally interested in, and I know that sounds horrible given the context of the story, but it's told from 2 perspectives of 2 girls who are best friends, and both of their experiences in the war. One is a pilot and one is kind of like a double agent spy, and the entire time that you're reading from their perspectives, they're pretty much writing their stories down, and it's just kind of a stream of consciousness for them. And it's kind of hard to follow, but it's meant to be. I get that. I understand that it kind of is supposed to just be what is currently happening to them mixed with their thoughts and feelings that got them to that point. But the only thing that kept it from being a 5-star book for me, just because the whole concept of this book is brilliant. Everything about this book is brilliant. I will be the first person to admit that. I just personally didn't enjoy reading it, and that may just be a terrible thing to say, but it was not an easy book to get through, and that's part of it. But I also just did not relate to the characters too much, because that's such a world that I'm so not involved in that I just was not as interested or invested as I should have been. That being said, this is a flawless book. I understand the praise that it gets. It's amazingly done. And the last book that I got to during this readathon is Furiously Happy by Jenny Lawson. I listened to this, and I actually listened to this with my boyfriend, and we pretty much died laughing the entire time. First of all, look at the cover. I mean, that's gonna give you a hint as to what the experience is gonna be like. The tagline is a funny story about horrible things, and it's very much that. I laughed so hard through the entire thing. It's a lot of just random anecdotes that she tells of awkward situations that she's been in her life, or just weird things from her childhood that she experienced. And there's a lot of tangents that she'll go off on that are completely irrelevant to the story that she was telling, but you just follow it along and crack up laughing because it gets more and more ridiculous the further she goes with it. And I really like that kind of humor where it just takes things so much further than is necessary. But it also definitely hits on a lot of mental illness, and as much as you'll be like crying laughing during this book, it's gonna punch you in the stomach with heavy, heavy stuff that she deals with. She is the first person to admit that she has a ton of depression and anxiety and just phobias and mental illness galore. And she is pretty raw with it. She gives you all of the dirty details that nobody wants to really expose to the world, hence the concept of anxiety. You don't ever want people to think that stuff about you. She puts it out there, and as somebody who also deals with anxiety, it was very refreshing to see that done in such a comedic but relatable way. I am currently almost done reading her first book, the one that came right before this. I just wanted to keep reading everything by her. She runs a blog, so I think I'm going to start following her blog, because her writing is just... I love women who are not afraid to be crass and vulgar and just drop the F-bomb constantly, because it kind of adds to the humor of a really dark situation. So I gave this 4 stars. It was great. We both really enjoyed it, and this is a good way to wrap up this readathon for me. I love this book. So those were the 4 books that I got to in my Genrethon readathon. I'm pretty proud of myself that I actually got through 4 books in a week, because sometimes I do that, sometimes I just don't touch a book at all. So I feel like that was a fairly good number to get to. If you guys participated in Genrethon, please comment down below. Let me know how you did, or link your video. I will go check it out because I love watching these. And I will see you guys in my next video. Bye.